When your love has moved away, you must face yourself and you must say, I remember better days. Don't you cry 'cause she is gone. She is only moving on, chasing mirrors through a haze.
Thank you, snowboarding.
Thank you, snowboarding.
Snowboarding, grazie.
Hey friends, how you doing? It's Chris Cracknell back with Thank You Snowboarding, the podcast that is covering all aspects of UK snowboard culture, from the early pioneers hand-building boards up in Scotland to the current world champion Mia Brooks and beyond. This is all done in association with the Snowboard Asylum, who've been looking after snowboarders since the start. And we're very grateful for them to be supporting us. So this week, really pleased to sit down with the man behind the Looking Sideways podcast, which was definitely, in my opinion, basically the gateway drug for all these other podcasts like The Bomb Hole and all these things. Matt blazed a trail years ago. In fact, I've got I do a podcast about music as well for my day job, and I remember speaking to Matt years ago and saying, how do you actually get a podcast up on iTunes as it was? And he sent me like this crazy method that he'd discovered, which wasn't kind of common knowledge. So he's Looking Sideways podcast is, as I said, blazed a trail. He's spoken to the great and the good of snowboarding over the last, I think, 7 years, he said. But that's not it. Matt was also heavily involved in Whitelines. His own company now, All Conditions Media, help shape other companies' interests in the outdoor world, including snowboarding. And is involved in the natural selection. I think it's fair to say, and I do level this at Matt at one point, is that he definitely has had a big hand and a quiet kind of steering hand in UK snowboarding culture. Often behind the scenes, but you know, he used to pop up in the lockdown movies. He's travelled extensively. He's been to everywhere you can basically strap a snowboard on. And he lives not far from me in Brighton on the south coast of the UK. And I bumped into him just before Christmas and we talked about this. And he said he'd love to come on. So we managed to lock this down a couple of weeks ago. So here we go. A bit of a chat with Mr. Matthew Barr. I mean, are you still following snowboarding as much as you ever did?
Are we recording, by the way?
Yeah.
Am I? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm old though, like, so I do, obviously, because I'm still like super involved in the industry, and you know, for natural selection, which I'm lucky enough to be on the selection committee, that is obligatory, really. You can't turn up for that and not know what's going on. Although that's primarily free riding and the backcountry. And so park riding, pipe riding these days, I didn't envy Tim and Ed. I mean, Ed's really good.
Fucking those guys. I can't believe how hard they worked. Actually, seeing them on the ground in Larks was... And Henry Jackson as well. Like the knowledge that they've got and being able to... My God, is that a switch?
Switch.
Jesus Christ.
I mean, it's not great podcasting, me showing Chris a picture of
No, it isn't. But,
a photo on my phone.
We'll chat that up on the Insta or something.
Yeah, like, I was messaging Timo and I sort of said, like, calling pipe live, fuck that. Like, I wouldn't want to do that, really. But yeah, I do follow it, obviously. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm like any old fart. I find I get a bit underwhelmed, but you know, like I think I saw a 2160 the other day, like on social, and I was just a bit like, okay, it's obviously like incredibly impressive, but I personally, I don't really know what to do with that. Like, you know.
Yeah, my brother had a good insight actually, because he was like, he was sort of saying that he thinks that, you know, people are and you've got to, if you get it wrong at that speed coming down from a jump that size, like someone's going to kill themselves at some point. And then he thinks that a lot of rules and things will come in and it will regiment snowboarding.
Yeah,
more.
you say that though.
Do you think that's the case?
I mean, look at Red Bull Rampage, like in the mountain bike world. I know we're not talking about mountain biking, but that event is so fucking dangerous. And like, look at big wave surfing. I mean, the consequences in that are just so. I mean, you know, it's amazing more people don't die really. Yeah. And there's no. I mean, they're doing that without insurance. You know, like because they can't get insured. So I'm not sure. I kind of agree with that really. Okay. But on the kind of sort of progression tip, you know, you might have seen I found a pic of Steve Bailey from Rosendale. Oh mate. And I put that on Instagram. Didn't Ed call that like the best dry slope shot? Yeah, and I mean, I kind of think I kind of think it's one of the best shots of a British rider ever. Actually, like because of what it sort of symbolises. You know, there's a moment in time. Well, that's a straight air mute, you know, on dry slope. It's probably like 10 feet high, isn't it? And he's obviously it's Steve, and the reaction that got, you know, and a lot of kids, you know, younger snowboarders going like, "What the fuck? Like, what's he doing?" You know, that's a straight air. Yeah. And it was quite kind of heartwarming, really, because someone was like, "That should be a cover," and I was like, "It could legit be a cover. Like, if you put that on the." I don't know if it was, but if the reason put that on the cover, it would be legit. Like people, like you wouldn't be like, oh, that's a bit of a kooky old dry slope shot. You know, it's just massive, styled, and anyone in any generation can look at that and be like, that is incredible. Yeah, and there's something quite nice about that, isn't there? Like that, it's in the same ballpark as that shot I just showed you. Yeah, you know, it's just like there's just something, you know, about that. That's why Steve was so good though, isn't it? Like and why he's still so highly regarded, because he's a bit of a sort of, you know, he's a bit of a kind of Tom Penny sort of character, isn't he? Like there's something about those people that like it just transcends what everyone else can do, and it just then becomes like this universally, you know, you just see it and you're like, okay, fair fucking play. Probably everyone from back in those times can look at that shot and they would know it was Steve Bailey without knowing it was Steve Bailey. Yeah, and there's that nostalgia thing. Obviously, you know, there was a lot of us old fuckers on there commenting, which is fine, you know. But equally, there was, you know, Sparrows on there. Matty McCormick shared it. You know, like they're all like, "Fucking hell, this is just legit," you know. And I thought there was something really, really nice about that. Is that because you know somebody doing a 2160 is a fairly unattainable. It's a fairly unattainable thing, probably for 99.9% of snowboarders, whereas boosting an air on dry slope is probably a lot more relatable. Yeah, I mean, there is that argument, isn't there, about progression and particularly in snowboarding, I think that argument gets made because obviously the progression has been so stratospheric in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, we were sort of saying that, weren't we, about double corks? You know, like, you know, and that's now just absolutely bog standard, isn't it? You know, like if you want to be a top freestyle snowboarder, like on transition, certainly. And I think there'll always be an element of that. I mean, obviously, clearly there's a place for that type of progression. Like it's always going to go that way. That's the engine of all these sports, isn't it? Activities, whatever you want to call them. Yeah. You know, there's always going to be young kids coming through who are going to do that, and that's brilliant, and that's part of it. Obviously, in snowboarding, it's a bit different because the style argument comes in. I mean, at the minute, people are making all this stuff look good, aren't they? So it's a bit different, but yeah. But I do understand that argument. I mean, that's an argument that I've heard like Jeremy Sladen make, for example, about you know why. That's quite interesting. Quite often, I've spoken to Jeremy a lot about this over the years because we obviously both work in the industry, as it were, and he talks a lot about like, you know, just communicating like the simple joy of snowboarding. Yeah, which ain't doing a 2160, is it, for me and you? It's like, you know, we're probably happy if we can do a decent turn, you know, or if we can do a nice feeling 3 or whatever like that. That'd be about the size.
Literally anything. I'm
That'd be about the
stoked
size. You know,
waxing my board before I go. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, the best feeling thing I can remember doing on snowboarding recently is like a very bog standard frontside 3 off a cat track. You know, that was like about 2 feet high. But like felt really nice, and that's kind of I mean I've not been riding for a couple of years, so I'd probably even that would be massively unattainable at the minute. So, but you know, my point obviously is, I mean, that's why people end up when they get older just booking powder trips, isn't it? That's why like loads of mutual friends of ours have just spent 2 weeks in Japan, you know, because that's what you're after, innit? That feeling, you know. Yeah,
is it? I mean, there doesn't seem to be as many channels to see what snowboarding looks like to the general populace. Like, there's no sort of lifestyle programs around it. All you see is competitions.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I guess so. As in, like, things you might see on Insta or social or whatever.
Not necessarily socials, but certainly sort of on, you know, the wider media. Like, you know, Ski Sunday obviously only really covers. They have a little bit of life. You know, they had an avalanche thing this weekend, but
yeah, it's
competition based, and that's kind of where it gets recognised, is people winning rather than people participating.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. There must be some stuff out there that's about that.
I mean, just like as what the general guy in the street sees, rather than like somebody who's actually looking for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question as well is like, how much do people that just go snowboarding 2 weeks a year actually give a fuck about any of that stuff? I mean, I think
that's a good point.
I think probably
you might have more of an insight into that.
Well, I mean, like probably as much as you know, we've all got mates who go riding and don't hear any of them talking about, you know, what happened at the X Games, or, you know, they might be aware like Mia Brooks, obviously, because that's so extraordinary what she's done, and that's getting loads of coverage. But I don't think most people. There's definitely a bit of a split, isn't there, between like the people who are like super into it, into the scene, into the comps, and that, like we all are or have been at points, and then the people who actually buy the kit and just go riding, you know.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because most people I know that go snowboarding, they like talking about snowboarding, but I think that's because I'm in a bit of a closed loop of.
Yeah, but I think for most people it's just about the experience, isn't it? Really.
Well, actually, something that I read in a Whitelines, so you might have had something to do with this, was it's an old copy, and it was to do with the state of the sort of industry.
Oh God!
And it was
sounds like something I would have written.
No, but it was pulling figures from I don't know if it's still the same, the SIGB, and they reckon.
I dimly remember this, actually. Yeah.
I mean, I know some of the people that you'd pulled in as kind of the person in the street.
I'm not sure if I did write that, but I do. There was a bit of a. So about 10 years ago, there was a bit of a thing, wasn't there? Like snowboarding's dying kind of thing. And
this might be older than that because it was in a mag. But anyway, it claimed that there was like 500,000 active snowboarders, people that would go snowboarding every year in the UK.
I mean, I'm not having that.
Where was this from? Hell. I guess it would have been like in the 2000s at some point, I guess. This magazine. I've got it somewhere. I'll have to dig it out.
Well, I mean, you know, back then it supported 3 magazines. Like, you know, we sold, I think at one point we were selling like 20,000 copies a month of Whitelines or something, which is fucking mad, isn't it?
That is mad.
Although that might have been what we told the advertisers. Don't quote me on that, Jim Pescott. But either way, like it's you get my point. Like there was enough cash and interest floating around that those 3 magazines got bankrolled for quite a significant period of time. That's all by people buying kit at the end of the day, isn't it? You know, that puts money into brands. You then put money into media budgets that then support things like magazines. You know, so maybe.
Let's get on to Whitelines in a minute. Let's head backwards first. What did snowboarding look like when you got into it? Like, how did you see it? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Manchester.
How did you see it first?
I got into snowboarding I was very lucky to meet Chris, Moran, Steve, Bailey, Stu, Brass quite soon after that, when I was really young, when I was like 14. I think I met Chris when I was 13, actually. And he would have been 17 And obviously at that age, that's quite a big. He could drive, you know.
Yeah.
That's how I got into all of it, really. Like I got into.
Where did you meet him at Rosendale?
I went. Chris came to our school.
Oh right.
Yeah, you know Drew, obviously.
Yeah.
So Drew's my oldest. We all grew up in Stratford in Manchester, which is where like Manchester United's from, like Old Trafford. And so I was at school with Drew. We were sort of best mates from when we were really young, and Chris came to our school like sixth form college.
Wasn't he like cool?
Yeah, he was. Like,
Why have I got the image? I've got an image of
No, he had
like a Union Jack bandana or something.
No,
like
he had
that.
a BMX, and he could ride it, and he had a baseball cap. Everyone called him American Kid. I mean, this is like 1990 in Manchester, and he'd been snowboarding, and he had a snowboard.
Right.
So that was the first time I'd ever heard of snowboarding when I met Chris, and Steve taught me to ollie actually. So they were older than us. And I'd dabbled in skating, and then got very into skating after meeting those boys, really, because Steve was like really good even then. He was like a proper good skater.
Springs in his legs, hasn't he?
Yeah, he was a proper good skater. Like I met him, and he could do like double kick flips back then, you know, like and he taught me to ollie, and so I just got super into skateboarding. And I couldn't afford a snowboard, actually. So I skied. No. So Chris used to drive us up to Rosendale every week on a Wednesday after school. And it would be me and Chris and Drew. And then we would go meet Steve, Paul Allen, I think he was called.
That name rings a bell.
Jamie. Oh, God, I feel really bad. I can't remember his last name. It'll come to me. And I couldn't, you couldn't get snowboards, could you? No. So I skied for like, because I just wanted to do something. So Chris taught me to ski, actually.
Did he?
Yeah.
Fucking chance.
At Rosendale Dry Slope. So I just used to sort of bomb about on skis. Like, Drew had a board. And then kind of got into it from that, like borrowed boards, started doing trips. Like they were all doing seasons, so we used to go out and see them. I can't even remember, early 90s. So Chris kind of taught me to snowboard, really, like in like on snow, and then we would go to the dry slope and stuff. But we were pretty into that, like, you know, basically the path that they forged, which particularly Chris, was the path that we all wanted to follow, really, because, you know, they were already like, back then they were already like really good, weren't they? You know, so Chris was sponsored, Steve was sponsored, they were on Burton, you know, they used to get free kit, which to us was just mind blowing.
You know, that's the holy grail, isn't it?
You know, we used to go to Drew's house, and because I think Chris got all his stuff delivered there for some reason, fuck knows why.
Probably the reason that he still gets stuff delivered here.
He's always had that in the locker, hasn't he? Yeah, I forgot that he still gets stuff delivered there, doesn't he? And we'd go there and have boxes of kit everywhere, you know, and we were just all like, whoa, fucking hell. So yeah, kind of through that. Yeah. But for me, immediately, it just kind of meant like a kind of a route out as well. Like, you know, like I really wanted to leave Manchester at the earliest possible opportunity. And I went to university when I was 18. And
where did you do that?
I went to Sheffield University.
Okay.
And then they would come and stay with Drew. So we went to Sheffield, moved out, got a house, and then we would go snowboarding. We used our student loans to go snowboarding in the holidays.
Amazing.
But I mean, like back then we got a grant. Like the first year I went to university, I got a fucking grant. You know? And then you could get a loan, so you just got free money. You know. Yeah. So we worked as well. So we all worked in McDonald's, like all of us. Like me,
I didn't
me,
know
Chris,
that.
and Drew. Yeah.
Did you get 5 stars?
I did get 5 stars.
I bet you did.
Yeah. Till bimbo. And then, like we would go riding in the holidays. We would blag boards off. Chris and Stu and Steve would like give us boards and stuff. So we were just like really lucky, you know, because we immediately because we knew these people, we were just sort of plugged into like the very nascent like British snowboarding scene, and then everyone's just so fucking welcoming, weren't they? You know, like it was very. it was just really welcoming, and which still is a feature of it, I think, isn't it? So
I think so, yeah.
yeah. So we're always like, I just like, yeah, I want to do what they're doing because they were doing seasons, you know. So that was the kind of plan.
So was Borg your first season?
My first season was in Maribel.
Was it?
Yeah, in 97. Yeah.
So did you not do seasons in Borg with that crew?
No, I visited a lot.
Right.
Yeah, so I went and stayed a lot with Reese and Danny Woodcock and
Fucking damn Woodcock.
yeah, and PM Paul Moore.
Yep.
Sash, obviously. Munson was around when he's. I was always a bit scared of Munson back then, which is quite funny because we're quite good mates now. So yeah, so that was what we wanted to do, really. Yeah.
So I guess your first season was that the big house in Maribel where you sort of set up a Whitelines office in the Alps.
Yeah, and that was all Chris as well. Like, so I mean, I can't really overstate like how much of an influence Chris had on me. Like back then, I interviewed him for my podcast. We talked about this quite a lot because I sort of felt it was important to give him the props, really, because you know he is a very charismatic, influential figure, isn't he? And he certainly was a big influence on me. So
He doesn't tend to he looks at things and thinks, why don't we just do that?
Yeah,
He doesn't
kid,
really see a reason not to.
As a kid, it was really obviously influential that, like, you know, when you meet somebody like that, and I kind of needed that. Like, my parents had got divorced and, you know, I didn't really see my dad. So, like, that was important to me back then, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, like so same with the writing. So basically I got into it through Chris, like basically like because I always could write. I was always like, that's why I went to university, because I was always sort of from quite an early age. I was like, you know, everyone was like at school and like, they're like, you know, you should do that. That's what you should do. You're good at that kind of thing. Yeah. So I'd always wanted to be a journalist. So when I got into skateboarding, I was forever like taking a little shitty camera out and taking pictures and, you know, making up fake zines and all that stuff. I was like avid reader of all the magazines, like and like religiously read Rad and kind of always wanted to emulate that. So Chris got asked to be interviewed for Snowboard UK, and he asked me and Drew to do it, actually. Right. And fair play to Eddie. So Eddie Spearing, who I know you spoke to for this, like he also had he was also brilliant. Like, he took a big punt there. Like, I sort of said this to him a few years later. I sort of thanked him, really, because I did the article and he was like, this is really good. You should do more of this. Do you want to do some more stuff for us?
That's a nice thing to say.
Yeah, and I was 18, I think. So, you know, I was a bit like, wow, I got paid to write about snowboarding. And then Chard asked me to do Steve's interview for Whitelines. Right. And so I did, you know. And then, so when it came to, I wrote for the mags through university, and would do stuff when I would go away. Like, I remember we'd go to the Les Art Brits and writing about that for one of the mags, and you know. So when I left university and went to do my first season, Chris was basically like, we should go to Whitelines and just tell them that we'll do the whole mag, you know. And I was a bit like, what, can we do that? And he was like, yeah, fuck it, we'll just go and do that. So we drove down to Oxford and we went to see Chad Thomas and Jim Peskett. And we basically Chris pitched him. I just sat there saying nothing really, because I was 20 and didn't know what I was doing. And he was like, here's the deal, we'll do all your stuff, you just pay us. You know, you come out with some ridiculous figure, and they just kind of laughed and said, well, we haven't got that much money, but we'll give you, I think they paid us $2,000 each, like, to do a season's worth of content. And that was enough to do a season, obviously. So that was like, you know, lift pass was £500. Yeah. Accommodation was £500, and then we had £1,000, like, to
remember when it used to be £500 for your season. Like,
we did a season on that, like a $2,000 season. Jesus. You know, and I worked in the summer, I had part-time jobs. Yeah. Load of shit jobs like everyone did. So I kind of went into the season with enough money to not have to do a shitty season job. So we did. So you're right, we did Whitelines. So that first year we hand wrote the articles and faxed them to the magazine, basically. And then a year later, Chris, flash bastard that years, bought a laptop. Right. In 1998. Nice. Which obviously was, you know, was people would literally travel from far and wide to see. You're the guy with the laptop, right? And he fucking had a mobile. This is how flash Chris was back in the day, you know, like, and he used to connect it up and do the fucking
no way
the Mission Impossible Eurostar scene modem. So we sent the mag back doing that in the second year.
Probably cost him more than you earned out of it.
Yeah. I mean, Chris was pretty profligate with his cash back then, so because he was earning decent money through snowboarding. So we did that, yeah, and that was then kind of what I ended up doing.
Because I was thinking about this earlier, or I've been thinking about this for a few days actually. Like your part in sort of the UK snowboard culture, I don't know if it's ever been sort of celebrated. I think you've sort of been under the radar with it, but through everything you've done, especially with Whitelines, obviously Snowboard UK sort of pioneered that, but I think Whitelines really had a sensibility about it. It had a lot of sort of humour in it, but also a sense of adventure and
I think that's all kind of fair enough, really. Yeah, I mean, we took that pretty seriously. You know, we were really lucky. You know, it's like me, Chris, Edley, and Nick Hamilton and Chod. You know, I mean, it's like a, you know, we were so lucky. Yeah. Because, you know, Nick, I mean, Ed went on to great things. Nick went on to great things. Like, we were all lucky enough to have really fulfilling, decent careers off the back of it. But for that 5-year period, I mean, yeah, like, what a privilege and we took it pretty seriously, you know. And also we were just like young dicks as well. Like, I think, you know, we didn't really think about commercial, like, we never once thought about, like, is this commercially a good thing to do?
Yeah.
Which I think's hilarious now, given what I do for a living. And I just think that, like, the people that ran those magazines, they just, I mean, talk about fucking patient, you know, like, because they let us get away with murder, you know.
Was there anything ever, like, any ideas that you pitched that were sort of turned down?
Yeah, the only one they ever turned down was the 50th issue of Whitelines, and we had this shot in the office that ended up on the cover of Badass Big Airs, you know, the throwing the dog off the jump.
Yeah.
The guy in the Mickey Mouse jumper. And we wanted to put that on the cover of the 50th issue, and Jim just put his foot down. He's like, no fucking way. And we were like, come on, it's funny. Yeah. Like, because, you know, there was such snobbery about snowboard mag covers, wasn't there, back then? Well, quite rightly, you know, it's a legitimate aesthetic, and it's, you know, those choices say a lot about where snowboarding's at right now.
Yeah.
Obviously why I brought up the Stee thing in that context earlier, but we just thought it was funny, you know. So we and that, for us, that was what Whitelines was about. Like, you know, for us, like, Whitelines was always about taking the piss out of how seriously everyone took it. You know, we had this whole thing for seasons about the phrase keeping it real, because that was like a real phrase that people used to use a lot back then, and people would write us letters saying, like, keep it real, and we just thought that was fucking hilarious. Like, you know, we're a bunch of, like, white kids, like, what are you on about? Snowboarding. So we always wanted to, like, you know, treat it with the irreverence but the respect that it deserved, which is, I kind of think, where that sensibility that you're talking about came from.
Yeah, I mean, although I always sort of realised that snowboarding was it was a privilege to do, really, more than anything else, I was fairly certainly guilty of maybe being a bit on that keep it real thing. Like, it wants to be presented in the right way, so that if you show it to other people, they get it. Do you know what I mean?
Some people hated what we did. Like, they genuinely did. Like, you know, some people just thought it was a joke, like, and thought that we were just idiots, you know. But we didn't really care, because we just amused ourselves. Like, one of the great joys of those days used to be, like, we would have an editorial meeting every probably June or July. We'd all go to Abingdon, because the way it used to work back then, obviously, with scheduling, was you would have to kind of get most of the magazines written by September. Yeah. So you'd go and do your season. You'd amass all your material. So Nick would shoot everything. Like, we'd go off and do all our stories, and they'd be for the following season. Obviously, everyone would be on that. You know, where everyone would be on that season's kit. Yeah. so that when it came out, the stuff that was in the magazines was what was in the shops. And so you would have to plan the magazines every June. So I think we would meet every May or June in Abingdon. We'd have a couple of days where we would literally sit down and plan the entire season's content, even though no one called it content back then. And that was like, again, me, Chris, Ed, Nick and Chod in a room fucking about, making each other laugh. Like, and I was always the one that was like, I quite want to go to Iran, you know, like, and they'd be like, okay, whatever, you know. So they humoured me a lot because I always had like quite odd ideas, you know, because for me, I was never as good as everyone else. You know, I was very average snowboarder compared to everyone else, even compared to like Ed and Chris and, you know, maybe more in Nick's camp. And for me, that isn't what snowboarding was about. It wasn't about being like really fucking good at snowboarding. Even though there's obviously a large part of it is about how you progress and how you ride and the satisfaction that you get out of that, obviously. But for me, it was always a tool for experiences. You know, it was always about like, where can this take me? You know, and what can I, and obviously you realise quite quickly, this can take you anywhere that you want, actually. If you're lucky enough, as we were, and I will stress that because we were very lucky to have a very, like I say, long-suffering boss who would give us money to go and do these trips. Although not that much money as well, because I should say we just learned to blag, you know.
I was going to say.
So all those trips were blagged, you know, like, and so I just spent 10 years blagging increasingly stupid trips, like going, because everyone else did all the like, let's go to Mammoth, let's go to Whistler, let's do that.
Yeah, they're the easy wins, aren't they?
Well, you do that because that's where the events are and that's where the pros are, and that, you know. So Nick's going to go and shoot in the Whistler backcountry with everyone there. He's going to go to go to the West Coast. He's going to go to all the comps. He's going to do that. That's all covered, you know. But I was always a bit like, that's not all snowboarding is.
No,
you know, snowboard. There's much more to this than that. So for me, I was a bit like, we would just get a map out and go like, where's got a resort? Let's go there. So, you know, went to Argentina, went to Russia, went to Iran, Lebanon, Uzbekistan. I was very lucky to go to some very fucking weird places. Not weird, but, you know, different places. Because I just always thought, what an amazing opportunity to see the world, you know, and have those experiences. Because snowboarding trips are as much about those experiences as they are about the riding part.
100%.
You know. And
were you like just... I guess that's a good life lesson, isn't it? Like, you come up with a plan, you know, put the pin in a map somewhere, and then just like, okay, let's work backwards. How do we get from here?
And again, Chris was the master blagger, you know, so like he taught me how to do that. Like, and then I got really good at presenting that from a media point of view. So, quite a lot of my time was spent putting those trips together and finding people to pay for them, you know. And obviously we had an amazing bit of real estate in Whitelines where we could say like, we'll put 10 pages in there. So back to those meetings, I would always turn up every year and be like, I quite want to go here, you know. And they'd be like, all right, well, we'll do a few of them a year. You know, you can do a few of them. We can't fill it with that, because, and that was always an interesting point of discussion, because I think me and Chris always wanted it to be more, especially Chris is quite an anarchic character creatively, you know. So he more took his cue from like quite a wider cultural frame of reference, I would say, you know. So he and that rubbed off on me. So we were both thinking about it in that way, you know. We weren't looking at like Transworld and going like, although I did do a little bit of that, but we were a bit more like, snowboarding is just the vehicle for this. It isn't the point of this. So what can we talk about within, if that's the way you look at it, if that makes sense? Yeah,
totally. I think that becomes more relevant as you get older as well. Like, looking back, I realised snowboarding was the vehicle to get me out of where I grew up. Yeah. And get me among the people that I needed to be around, because I didn't fit in everywhere. Yeah. Same. And I realised that snowboarding's been the vehicle for like the majority of my life, I'd say. Yeah.
Well, that's why we're in this room. We know each other through snowboarding, you know.
Exactly that.
And the best friendships in my life are from snowboarding. Yeah. You know, like and I really can't say how much I appreciate that now. You know, especially everyone like us who have been a loose part of this community, you know, without getting too schmaltzy, but it is a real thing, and it is a lovely thing. And you know, for me, that's why I really love like Nelson's thing every year, because that's now
I've never made it to that.
That's
sadly.
now like for our generation, that's now the kind of gathering.
Yeah.
And you go there, and it's, I mean, and there's other stuff, obviously. There's like spring break is obviously a big thing on snow, but you know, you go to that thing and you'll see people you haven't seen for years, and all you know, like I've got no business being friends with some of the people I'm friends with through snowboarding, really, you know, but they're my best mates, because we met through that, and we've got that shared experience, and that's one of the best parts about it. So, you know, bringing back to what you were talking about with this sort of sensibility, if you like, of something like Whitelines, like that's very much what we would try to get across, really, you know.
Yeah, I remembered yesterday that video that Ed made, the Jilted John one.
Yeah, fucking so good. I watched that last night.
Up. I mean, I did check with Ed first, because I was like, I just want to make sure, because obviously you've probably got a lot, you know, being in the media and everything, I better check in with you first before I post this. And just everyone fucking loves it. And it's just all that sort of stuff that went alongside with the snowboarding.
Yeah.
That was just brilliant, you know, like that's what lit it up for me.
Yeah.
But then I had a conversation with someone sent me a message, I should remember his name, but I'll remember it afterwards, who said that they were at the Sheffield riot. And that's something we might get to as an aside, because I'm building a special.
I wrote about that.
Did you?
For Whitelines,
okay, right.
Remember that night really clearly. So that was when I was at uni in Sheffield. Yeah, I was in my third year.
Let's hold it.
Yeah.
That's an extra.
Yeah.
But yeah, this guy, he was like, you know, I was about 14 at the time. I was at the Sheffield riot, and we used to snowboard up in the northeast, but he never felt like he was part of the scene. And I was like, well, funny that. I never really felt like I was part of the scene. It's only looking back now that I realised that probably everybody else felt like the scene was happening somewhere else. But if you were at the Sheffield, you were as much part of a scene as anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that's just to do with being young, though, isn't it? As well, like, you know, when you're young, everyone has things that are going on. Like, if I look back at that era, you know, we were drinking so much,
Jesus
all of
Christ.
us, like, and whatever. I'm not bringing that up to like glorify it or anything. I'm just saying that, like, there's a lot of like attendant like mental health things that go with that, you know, that like, that when I look back on a lot of the behaviour that took place back then, it's quite explainable, like, by that. And this thing that you're talking about, like this feeling of slight social isolation and like, oh, I don't really belong. And I sort of look at that in that kind of camp, really, like these days. Like, I think I certainly had an element of that. Like, I certainly had.
Yeah, me too.
And I think that's part of being a human, isn't it? And being young as well, like, and perhaps try to find your place and wondering if you where you fit in and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
sort of being uncomfortable with yourself and just not knowing where your place is.
I mean, those are quite natural rites of passage. Like,
I think so.
And so I kind of, if I think back to some of the pointless battles that I fought back then, I just think, God, I was so young, and, you know, what a waste of energy, really. But but like, you know, that's kind of, you have to learn all that, don't you?
Yeah, I guess so. It feels a lot more comfortable now.
Yeah.
I'm definitely like happy where, and then I realised that anyone could have come in and met everyone and been part of it all. I don't think there was no real gatekeepers, was there? It was just like, if you turn up and you like snowboarding, that's kind of enough, isn't it?
I mean, we kind of were gatekeepers, really, because obviously we were the people that decided what went in that magazine. So like, we certainly used to get shit for that. Like, you know, people always used to go on about all we did was put our mates in it, and, you know, like, and I was always just like, well, we've got a lot of mates.
Well, and they're the people that show up to do stuff, that are available to do stuff as well.
People that, I don't know, like, again, that's just when you get older, you kind of learn you can either moan about that or you can understand how it works. And
Yeah.
you can. So there were plenty of people that we didn't know that we put in that magazine because we just like what they did. And I'm still like that today, you know, with what I do. Like, I don't give a fuck who you are or what kind of pedigree you've got, as long as what you're doing is interesting and good. And then that should be enough to get you somewhere.
Yeah,
Really.
and that you show up. Like,
Yeah.
you know, sort of the same doing this. The people that get an episode, and generally everyone's wanted to do it, but like, you know, you're like, oh, I'll come around Wednesday, and it's like, great. Do you know what I mean? Like,
It kind of made me laugh when you were like, yeah, cool. Like, I was like,
well, it's tax return down. I'm avoiding that as well.
well, also, like, you know, I run a podcast as well, as you know, and it's pretty hard getting guests, isn't it? So when someone's keen, you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's do it, you know.
Yeah, well, let's get into your podcast then. I mean, you've set the standard for action sports podcasts, haven't you?
Well, that's
really?
very kind.
I mean,
yeah.
how old is it now? It's got to be seven.
It's 7 years old. Yeah, I started it in 2017. Yeah. I mean, it's a real privilege that. Yeah, I was thinking this last week. Like last night, I had an amazing conversation with somebody that I met through the podcast, which was just incredibly enjoyable. Like that, we'll go out as an episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still a lot of fun. Yeah, still really into it.
I mean, you've interviewed pretty much everyone, certainly from a snowboarding aspect. Who didn't you get? I guess you didn't get Jake Burton. Did you get Jake Burton?
Well, one of the things I do regret is like, no, I never got Jake, but I've interviewed a lot of people over the years.
Yeah.
Like, and before that predates. So I interviewed Tom Sims, you know. Like,
Did you?
Yeah.
Was that for the mag?
For Whitelines.
Yeah.
And
What was he like?
he was brilliant. And I lost it, like, in a move. Like, I had it on a tape somewhere, you know.
way.
And he... So I've often thought, like, I could have put that out actually, like if I'd have kept it. So there's a lot of stuff like that I regret. Oh man, I get turned down all the time. Like,
Who are you chasing in the snowboarding world?
In the snowboarding world, who would I? I'd like to interview Terry Kidwell. He's been somebody I've wanted to speak to for a while. Because obviously he's got a very pivotal story, but I'd want to do that in person.
Right. It's a nice work trip.
Yeah. It's a good question, actually. I've not really been giving it too much thought recently because I've been pretty involved in another big project that I'm working on. So I haven't... I just did a really good one with a guy called Eric Blam. I should work out how to pronounce that.
Photographer?
He used to edit Transworld, and he was good friends with Craig Kelly, and he's just written this amazing biography of Craig Kelly. Called The Darkest White, I believe it's called, and that was great. I'll think about that. Yeah. I mean, with snowboarding, you know, the Bommel does a really good job of like the scene stuff, doesn't it? You know,
yeah, it's
like,
got core.
So I don't really go near that. Like, there's a lot of podcasts now that really do that well.
Yeah.
When I started mine, there was no Bommel, there was no effing Rad, which is a friend of mine called Eric in the States, who does a really good job of those kind of core interviews. So I don't tend to I'm not that bothered about doing that sort of stuff.
No, it always seems that you've steered towards the sort of more thoughtful, insightful guests who have maybe done other things as well.
Well, I mean, I just, always been into the story, as a journalist. Like, what's the interesting story here?
Yeah.
And I personally don't find guided trick that interesting. I used to, and I spent, a big part of my career running a magazine where that was a huge part of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not that bothered about that anymore, So it's more about finding stories that I think are interesting. I mean, I'm really lucky with Looking Sideways because I get to completely please myself, which was a big reason why I did it.
Yeah.
Because I've been a working journalist now for nearly 30 years, and a big part of it is pitching, and a big part of it is pitching and getting knocked back. It doesn't matter who you are, that happens.
Yeah.
And big part of the appeal of doing Looking Sideways was to just be like, oh, I don't have to pitch and I'll just do what I want to do. And I've been very lucky that that's found an audience that people seem to trust that.
Yeah.
So I don't really think about like, is anyone going to care about this, or the kind of editorial filter is like, do I think this is interesting? Which is incredibly fortunate, you know, to be able to do that. Because I've had some pretty fucking, you know, niche esoteric guests on there, but people will listen to it and people will like it, you know. So,
and obviously that feeds into what you do now as well. ACM, sorry, All Conditions Media. It's not ACM anymore, is it?
I mean, everyone calls it ACM. Yeah.
So describe what your life with ACM is.
Well, I mean, I've basically got two jobs. You know, I'm still a journalist, so I do Looking Sideways. I still write. I do other things, like I'm doing a big documentary series at the minute, and then I do ACM, which is like effectively like my day job. ACM is a marketing agency these days. A pretty like, you know, yeah. I mean, it's a proper business. You know, we've got 15 staff. Like it's a. I just paid the wages today. That's enough to remind me how serious a thing it is.
Your responsibility.
Because it's quite a lot of cash every month now. Again, me and Chris, that was the. I mean, Chris. It's actually Chris. Like, so Chris basically set it up as a business for like stuff that he was doing, and then when we did Whitelines together, we just put everything into that business. And then that was called ACM from the start. Yeah. And then when we left Whitelines, which is in 2005, basically got fired. Hang
on a minute, can we?
Well, I mean, like I was just thinking, I should probably expand upon that. Like we got in some shit. Like, so I mean, it's kind of comedy really. Like I wrote a review of a pink rip curl jumper, I think it was, which was quite brilliant, which was quite scathing,
right?
Because, you know, like that's what we did.
Yeah. That's the form, isn't it?
Someone sent us a pink jumper to review, and I thought it'd be really funny to just rip the piss out of that.
Yeah.
The brand didn't think that was funny in the slightest, and the PR agency didn't think that was funny in the slightest. If anyone that works for me is listening to this, they'll be fucking pissing themselves at this. So. Basically the brand threatened to pull all their ads out of, but not only out of Whitelines, out of the entire permanent publishing.
Yeah, so that was Sidewalk,
Surface Pass. That represented a lot of money.
Yeah.
So Jim, our boss, was pretty angry about that. So he basically wanted me to go to ISPO to grovel to the person in question.
Shit.
I was in Lebanon at the time, snowboarding.
Right.
On a trip that Jim had effectively paid for. So he phoned me up and he was like, "Where are you?" And I was like, "I'm in Lebanon." And he was like, "What are you doing there?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm snowboarding for the mag." And he was a bit like, "Well, you need to get yourself to fucking ISPO and you need to apologise."
No way.
And I was like, well, I can't, obviously. I'm in Lebanon. So he made Chris do it. And he did it. Like, he drove to fucking ISPO and had to basically go and grovel to the guy in question, who's I'm not going to say who it was, but he's a very notorious alpha of the industry. And at that point we were a bit like, yeah, that might be the straw that broke the camel's back, really. So we kind of started planning for what might happen if we got the boot. Right. And then at the end of that winter, Jim was a bit like, I'm gonna change it up. I'm gonna, like, you two are out, basically. Shit. Ed had left at that point because his career had taken off. Nick had left, he'd gone to Transworld. Yeah. So it was a bit of we were like, Chod was still there. Yeah. So it was a bit, and then basically what happened, I understood it all a lot more. I was fuming at the time. I bet. You know, like we were like outraged at the time. You know, we've put 10 years into this, like blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've seen Jim since, and we've laughed about it, to be honest. Like, and I've apologised to him as well. Because not for that, because I didn't think I should have had to apologise for that, but I've apologised for just the fucking, like I said, the lack of commercial acuity that we had that must have driven him fucking mental. What's actually really funny about that, I know I'm going all over the place here, is
It's good.
Ben Powell's a good friend of mine who used to run Sidewalk, and I was talking to Ben recently, and he was like, you know what's funny? Like, when this was all going on, he's like, Jim was 30.
I know, that's it. Everyone's so fucking young. No one knew what they were doing.
And I was like, no fucking way. And he was like, he was 30. And we thought he was an old man. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, anyway, so that happened. And so we set up ACM. So we were like, we'll set up this agency. And we called it a freelance writing agency. And the first job we actually got was that footprint book that we did. Don't know if you remember
I remember,
that.
yeah. I think I wrote some words for that.
Snowboarding the World. You did the Borg and the Les Arc article, yeah. And that was the first job that we got, and that was a year's worth of work to do that.
Nice.
So that gave us a little platform, and we were just freelance journalists for probably about 5 years. We got Ewan involved for a bit, and then our friend Ben Mundy, we got involved because he's like quite a highly regarded surf journalist. So we were like, okay, well, we could get a surf element to this. And at the time, like, the pitch was that we would write about these things for mainstream press in a credible way, because obviously it was fucking terrible, wasn't it, the way that, and it kind of worked for quite a while, and then that sort of turned into a travel writing career for me. So I ended up basically, I just carried on going snowboarding basically, because I just kind of realized that the same blag that had worked for Whitelines I could now do in the mainstream press. So I just basically,
it's probably more money for it.
It wasn't even that it was more money, it was just better trips. So I just got like the level of trip went up. Where's
your dream? Where's been the best?
The best blag?
Yeah.
Undoubtedly Revelstoke. I mean, I've been lucky enough to do fucking loads of amazing trips, but Revelstoke, which was 11 years ago, and I wrote about that for the Evening Standard, I think, and I literally wrote about 500 words. I mean, it was essentially like an oligarch's heli lodge in Revelstoke. So it had like a helipad out the front.
Oh yeah.
It was 80 grand a week, I think. Had a private chef.
What?
Like, it was fucking ludicrous. And it was owned by a guy who runs one of the UK's big construction firms. It's like a family. You'll probably know they are, given your bit of your background, but they're a huge construction firm, and they built all the Tesco's and Sainsbury's, I think. Oh, right. So they, printing money. Yeah. And I think they were billionaires, basically. And he was probably about our age. He was like the son. Right. And he ran part of the business. Yeah. But they were that minted that he'd built it as a sideline. Fucking hell. Because he was a sick skier. He was a fucking amazing skier. Because he'd obviously been on skis since he was a kid. He was a charger. Yeah. And he'd basically decided, like, fuck it, I'm just going to build the ultimate heli lodge in Revelstoke as like a sideline. I mean, I remember at one point he told me, so it had this atrium, like Alpine chalets, with this, incredible fireplace that went up like 5 stories or something. And he was telling me that he'd had it rebuilt like 3 times because he didn't like the draw. I mean, is that kind of wealth, Yeah. So that was a definite fucking high point for sure. Because it was just amazing, because we did like 4 days heliing, I think, in that tenure where they just did natural selection. Right. It's there. And it was just, as you might imagine, it was fucking ludicrous. So did a lot of that. And then basically we always did gigs that were like, we used to call them cash cows. Like, every now and again, like, some brand would come along and be like, snowboarding's cool. We're going to get into snowboarding. Nokia, Motorola, like. Oh, yeah. Back in the day. On that sort so we were all like, we always got brought into sort of to run that. Like, Phil Young is somebody I learned a lot from, because Phil was the best at that game. You know, so I learned a lot from Phil, and then that became more and more of a thing. And about 2010, the recession, the global financial crisis or whatever it was, Ben left, Ewan had already left. So it's just me and Chris, and the work dried up for quite a while. And I remember quite clearly because we were like, well, fuck, we're going to have to get jobs.
Imagine that.
I know, we were both like, fucking hell, we might have to get a job. So we decided to give it like one last sort of push, and then it kind of worked. So that was the point it started to resemble what it is. So I keep bashing your mic, don't I? Is what one of the things that it started to resemble what it is now. Like I was like, and that's where I ended up sort of beginning to steer it, because I suddenly was like, actually, this is a proper thing. Like this could be a proper agency.
Yeah.
And at that point, as a journalist, I'd worked with marketing agencies and PR agencies from the other side of the line for like 10 years, and they were all fucking shit. Yeah. So I was just a bit like, we could do that so much better, you know.
What I really like is the fact that you've sort of taken everything you've learned from snowboarding and you're using it to influence sort of other sort of sections of not just the snowboarding industry, but like all the other brands that you work with. It's everything you've sort of discovered through snowboarding, and snowboarding is then
true.
having an influence on everything else.
Yeah, it's very, and there's that. That's an interesting point. I've probably never thought of it that explicitly, but it probably is true, I guess. I mean,
because I chatted with Leslie about that, the fact that it was kind of what they did in snowboarding with Team GB is slowly sort of seeping out through
we worked
into other
me
areas.
and Leslie. Yeah, and I guess like that kind of scenario I talked about with Whitelines, you know, what we were trying to do, and the fact that we, for right or wrong, thought we had a lot of editorial integrity and we were quite serious about that. It's definitely what I still do, with what we do. And ACM now, I mean, it's a proper thing. It's like, we've got 15 clients. We're lucky we've got the best clients in the game. Arc'teryx, Yeti, Finisterre, you know, like Gore-Tex. They're, you know, great brands, get to do really interesting work. But that kind of, how can you do this in a way that isn't shit is very much part of it. Because ultimately, like, there's just a lot of lazy, I don't even think lazy is the right word, like unimaginative, like, people just copy stuff, don't they? You know, like that's just seems to be the fact of the matter. Like if someone's doing well, people will copy that. That is endemic in marketing. You know, like at the minute, everyone is banging on about Liquid Death, you know, like that water brand.
The water brand, yeah.
So every fucking meeting I have with new clients, everyone's talking about that. I mean, and I've seen that for years. Like, you know, there'll always be a brand that's doing really, really well.
Yeah.
Finisterre for years, Patagonia for years. Like, that you'll speak to brands, particularly like younger brands, and they'll be like, we want to be like that. Yeah. And I'm always like, why do you want to be like that? Why don't you just do your own thing? Like, how can you do something for yourself? Like, but it's really hard not to do that. It's really hard not to just see the popular thing and think like, well, that's what I should do. And I actually strongly believe that's not what you should do. Like, I actually strongly believe that what you should do is try and find your own thing and do that really, really well. Like, whatever that looks like. And not, so that's what we did with Whitelines. And that's what I've always tried to do. And that's definitely what we try and do with ACM. I mean, it's obviously different when you're working in marketing because it's sales at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So, it has different commercial pressures, which is why obviously there's like irony upon irony of my position now compared to when I worked for Jim. But I still feel like finding that room for asking questions, like, and how can you do this in a way that's a bit more interesting and is still at the heart of it, really. And it certainly was what was behind the podcast, like I say.
Yeah. That just takes me back to something my brother talked about, because obviously he shot with Nick quite a lot. And he was on Airwalk, and obviously they made their own adverts. I
remember Dave had a brilliant ad, didn't he, that Airwalk cliff ad? Yeah. Yeah, that Nick shot. I remember that really well.
But he was saying, you know, and actually looking through a lot of the old magazines, it's quite surprising how many sort of generic adverts were put in. Yeah. Just by some marketing. Oh, yeah, they need an advert. Here's the one that goes in every magazine, rather than actually trying to create something and using your local rider for a local audience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I say, I now believe it's kind of human nature, really. But what's also interesting is a lot of people are quite happy about that. Like, a lot of people are like quite happy with that status quo, and you know, fair enough. But it's just not really what I want to do. You know, like if I'm gonna if I'm going to run the company that I'm lucky enough to run now with Jojo, my business partner, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of stress. Actually, it's not a lot. I mean, it's not fucking coal mining, is it? But like, you know, it's like.
Well, yeah, but you've got you've got the responsibility of 15 people.
It's hard work. You know, we've got to bring a certain amount of cash in, and we try and do it in a way that we can be happy with, you know, like, and not just try and go lowest common denominator to like earn cash. And do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because quite a few years ago now, we sort of talked a bit about mentoring.
Yeah.
And that you had a mentor for your business.
Yeah.
From that experience, what would you say is like the sort of benefits of having someone as a sounding board or someone that can give you some advice?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of mentoring myself at the minute, actually. And I think, quite a relevant question because I've been thinking about this quite a lot. I just think it's about giving people permission to like believe that they can do it. Yeah. Really. I think it's that simple.
Is that what you needed?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I've always needed that. You know, that's why Chris was such a brilliant mentor for me. That's why Steve was a brilliant mentor for me. That's why Eddie was brilliant for me. You know, like they all gave me permission to do what I needed to do. And that's been a real, Ed Lee was, I mean, Ed was a huge influence on me, you know, like the way he lived his fucking life.
And still lives his
life. You know,
life.
I was a bit like, okay, you know. So that's always been a thing. With my mentor, I mean, he's a non-exec director, as Ned, as they say in the wanky fucking business world. I actually it was quite practical. Like at that point, ACM had, I think, doubled in size. And so Jojo came in 2014. So Jojo ran another agency and she's a good friend of mine. Yeah. And I was starting to get out of my depth a little bit. I can't quite recognise that. I was like, I'll blag stuff. Like, I don't mind blagging stuff. And I strongly do think that bullshit, fake it till you make it, is very true. Like, I think, you know, I mean, look at this place that you've built, you know, but I'm not being disparaging. I'm just saying, like, you've made this happen by your force of like, I want to do that and I'm just going to fucking do it. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, and you learned along the way. That's what I mean. So I was always happy to do that, but I did think, fuck, I need a bit of help here. Like, and Jojo came at it from a slightly different angle from me. Yeah. And I respected it greatly. It just made sense. I just thought I was like, we should just work together. This is mad. Like, you know, we live in the same town. We're basically.
I mean, you were sharing the same office at one point, weren't you?
Yeah. So we did that. So we worked, and then Chris left because he was a bit like, actually, this is now getting a bit serious. Yeah. You know, it's not really for me, which is fine. Difficult to negotiate at the time, but I'm very proud of the fact that we managed to, you know, stay friends and wasn't a big thing, although we did have to work hard at that at the time. So when he left, like we'd gone, I think at that point we had about 5 staff, and I just was like, fuck, I need help on the business side of things, you know, like I can't just wing this anymore, you know.
Was it easy to ask, like, to get help?
Yeah, well, at the time, there was actually a government scheme that was very geared towards small businesses where you could, they paid for mentors. Wow. Yeah, I mean, occasionally they do that, don't they? Remember, there was a free broadband thing for businesses a few years back, which we also did. So we had one guy initially. He was all right, like, but then I changed it up and got this guy. So it was more about, just getting like the practical help, and what it came down to is, like I say, he was just a bit like, yeah, you got great business, and you know, this has got real, you know, he was a bit like, what's the plan? And I was like, there's no plan. And he's like, well, let's get a plan, you know, what do you want to do? And he said, what's your ambition with all this? And I was like, and this sounds like a sort of bit of a line, but we were like, earn more money, work less, go snowboarding and surfing more, like, you know, like that. That has always been at the heart of what I've tried to do, is incredibly privileged and like selfish as that sounds, but that's pretty much been the motivation behind my entire career. I'm inverting the commas because obviously it's kind of weird what I do, but
No, but it's easier maybe to think of it in those terms, because certainly with the studio, sort of Lucy sort of said, what do you want to do? And it's like, well, do I want to be like a Grammy award-winning engineer or producer? Or do I just want to work these hours on cool projects, have time to be with the kids and everything?
Yeah.
And actually, it's the small little things, they're the things to work towards rather than these sort of big achievements, because you can never kind of...
Yeah. I mean, you know me pretty well. You know, you'll know that I've always been somebody that takes on a lot of stuff, you know, like...
You're a doer.
I just think that's wired into me in some way.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've stopped kind of questioning that really. I've got better at knowing, I've been a bit easier on myself, like knowing when I need to like have a bit of a break. And but ultimately I'm somebody who's always like taking on stuff, you know, and I have kind of obviously wondered over the years, like, where the fuck does that come from? Like, it'd be quite nice to turn that off really, you know, at points, especially in times of like stress. But yeah, I think I'm just reconciled to the fact that that's who I am really. I don't think I'll always be doing that.
Fair enough.
Sean Lee always says to me, like, you'll be busy in a cave, you know, like, she's kind of right.
So just to sort of bring it back to snowboarding, what's on your, have you got a bucket list? Is there anything that you want to do that you haven't done yet? Just talking about ambition and goals.
Free snowboarding?
Yeah.
I mean,
you've been everywhere.
I've never been to Alaska. I'd love to go to Alaska, obviously. I wouldn't mind going snowboarding, to be honest, at the minute. Like, I haven't really been for a while.
Yeah,
like,
what is snowboard? Because, I mean, we went on that trip. We went and did that Stentiford's trip to Chamonix.
That was so fun, that trip. That was about, what, 6 years ago, do you reckon?
That was about that. Yeah, that was previously, that had been the last time I'd been riding.
Yeah, that was great, that trip. We had a great day, didn't we, back on the tour? So fun that day.
Had a brilliant day. I was in one of the darkest places I've ever been in. Currently around all that trip. Everything kicked off for me. So I do remember it, but I don't.
Yeah, you were on a tough one, weren't you? Yeah, I mean, I haven't been riding. I didn't go riding last season at all, which was the first time in 20 years, 25 years maybe, which was weird. It was odd. It's because me and my wife bought a house in France, in Normandy, that we are trying to do up. Well, I mean, that'll be like. That'll never be done, you know.
That's a long-term project.
That's a big fucking project, yeah. So, but that obviously just took all my cash, and then obviously with Brexit, it's tricky now because I have to. You get 90 days.
Yeah, you're using up all your time.
So it was hard to justify going riding last year. So I didn't go riding last year.
Scotland?
Well, I had a trip booked to Scotland last week, which is to write a story. I was going to get the train up, the sleeper, go see Leslie and Hannah Bailey.
I don't know Hannah.
Hannah's just made a great film about Scottish snowboarding, actually.
Oh, was that the Thrawn? That was that.
That's Hannah's film.
Yeah, I put a link to that on Leslie's episode last week.
Yeah. So they're good friends of mine.
Right.
Obviously, Leslie's one of my closest friends. So I was going to go and stay with them, but my wife fractured her ankle.
Oh shit.
She's all right. Like it was just one of them. But I just couldn't go, you know. So and then the snow was also. I phoned Les. She's like, "Snow's shit anyway, so don't worry about it." So I spoke to Les last night actually, and she's like, "Snow's really bad. So why don't you just make a late call?" I was supposed to go to Japan, and in Feb that just got cancelled because that was another press thing. Because basically, I was a bit like, I dusted off the blagging cap.
Yeah, if money's tight.
Yeah, it kind of was.
Get on the blag.
I was a bit
Same here, man.
I was a bit like, I need to start doing some writing again. So I pitched a couple of papers. I'm doing stuff for the Telegraph at the minute. I'm doing stuff for a few mainstream magazines. And I pitched Telegraph to go and do Leslie's thing. They were like, yeah, go for it. So I sorted all that out through like Tourist Board. Yeah. And obviously that didn't take up any Brexit days. And also I fucking love snowboarding in Scotland.
Yeah, I've not been yet.
I think it's brilliant. I know everyone fucking bags it and it's shit. But again, I just love the experience of it, you know.
Yeah. It's the adventure more than
I really do have a soft spot for it. So another trip that I blagged was Japan. But I got an email yesterday saying that trip had been cancelled because the hotel that we're staying at's not finished or something. So I was a bit like... So I actually spoke to a friend of mine, Owen Tozy, yesterday, who I do a lot of stuff with around the podcast. And I think we're going to try and blag a trip to Japan next January for a couple of weeks.
Nice.
Looking sideways and using all these ins that I had from this last trip.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go and stay with Chris, I think, this year.
Oh, yeah.
I might go and do a week with Chris.
You might be out there because Lucy's going out.
I haven't booked anything.
I think that same week, Lucy's...
I've not made any plans,
no,
but I think I might just go and work from there for a week or two.
Nice.
And hang out and go riding with Chris. I'll definitely go to Scotland. And that's kind of it at the minute. I did natural selection committee again.
What does that look like?
What does it
entail? Like what's your responsibilities? With
this year it was me, Ed, Lee, Liam Griffin, who runs the whole series, who's like the boss basically. Mary Walsh, who is like an American journalist and commentator and very in the scene. A guy called Tom Monterosso maybe, who everyone calls T-Bird, who's a ledge, good friend of mine.
Your fucking nickname being T-Bird.
He's good. He's a good lad, Tom.
Is he?
Yeah, he's like he's a bit of an Ed. He's like an Ed of the US scene.
Okay.
Riders all love him. Does everything. And then Pat Bridges, who used to run Snowboarder and who's a fucking hilarious character.
He's keeping it real, isn't he? I mean, he's down for snowboarding,
ace.
Isn't he?
Pat is ace. Like I've written for Pat for 2 decades.
Yeah.
So I had a column in Snowboarder when he ran Snowboarder.
Right.
And he's always commissioned me, and we never really met. I met him a couple of times at events, but 2 years ago, Natural Selection in Jackson, I was commentating on that, and he was there, and we hung out for 2 weeks. It was fucking classic. He's really funny. He's a great man. So we do that every autumn, and it's a lot of geeking out. It's a lot of, we use video parts as the basis for it. So who's got a current part?
Yeah.
And, who deserves to be there? I mean, my role in that is a bit more like the kind of story role, I would say. Ed's very much the hardline fucking, we can't have him in, that's a pat down, not a, he's like full fucking geek off, Like, I mean, it's awesome to behold, really.
Yeah.
Like any clip, he's like got this encyclopedic opinion on,
Yeah.
But I kind of am there to think about the stories a bit more, because at the end of the day, like, it's a global thing. They've got ambitions for that project, and you can't all be Americans and Scandies, Yeah. Like, there needs to be narratives, there needs to be stories.
Yeah.
So the level of riding's a given. If you're in that conversation, you're a fucking good snowboarder.
Yeah.
And you probably have a shout to be there. So there's some people that are always absolute no-brainers. Like, I don't think he's coming this year, but like, for example, John Jackson's part, we saw that and we were just like, I mean, fuck me. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, so he was a bit of a unanimous one. Longo, he's always in the conversation.
Man, that fucking transfer he did the other year.
Yeah,
One out of nowhere.
Yeah, so I kind of bring like, what's the story?
Yeah.
Like, how does this work as so
that's pretty crazy. Again, like the whole UK thing, the fact that there's 2 English people on this quite small selection committee for a global event.
Massive privilege, that. I mean, it's a huge privilege. And I turned it down when they asked me. Like, they asked me to do it.
Bit of imposter syndrome.
A little bit. Liam and Travis asked me to do it. Clang, name drop.
Yeah, go on.
Like 4 years ago, and I said no.
Yeah.
And they were very taken aback, and Liam was like, why are you saying no? And I was like, it's got to be somebody more qualified than me.
Probably not many people turn that gig down, right?
And Travis was like, well, that's why you should do it, because you said no. And I was a bit like, okay, I can't really argue with that logic. So I said yeah, and it's been great. But what I was going to say is, like, they back to the question, I kind of said to Liam, I'll do it again this year, but you got to pay for me and Owen to go to Revelstoke to do it. So we might go and do that now. I need to give him a shout. But they run that on a bit of a shoestring, as ludicrous as it sounds. It's a very ambitious thing that, what they try to do. Like those live broadcasts, they ain't cheap.
From the back of Beyond.
Yeah, so it's not like they've got loads of cash.
No.
So we'll see. But I might try and go and do that.
Well, that'd be sweet.
Yeah, I mean, that would just be kicking about Revelstoke for a couple of days. Like I did the commentary a couple of years ago, and I never want to do that again. Like
that's a different game.
It was a great experience, and I think I did well. Like it seemed to go down really well. Like, but I just thought I'm not. It's cool to do it, and I was very flattered to be asked, but I'm not that interested in doing that again.
No, I get that.
Yeah,
I mean, what Ed and Tim and it's a skill. It's a real specialist skill, isn't it? Being able to translate what they're looking at and what people are seeing into.
Yeah,
sort of because it's more for the sort of lay person who might be tuning in. I think that's one of what Ed and Tim. Yeah, I've told them this. What they do really well is translate something that you just couldn't fathom what it is into something that the average person can be like, I understand that a bit more.
Yeah, this boy's the tiramisu of snowboarding. He's got the lot. Custard,
you say he's looser. You say he's looser than a rental bowling shoe. Or something.
Ed actually said that at Bornex one year, and I've never let him forget it. The tiramisu line. Here he is. This boy's the tiramisu of snowboarding. He's got the lot. Custard, sponge. Yeah. So I couldn't do it again, really.
No, that's fair enough.
One thing I did find from that, I just thought, fuck, I wonder if this... I mean, like anything in life, you get more experience and you get used to things. But it was like an out-of-body experience doing live TV for me. It was like... It was beyond... It wasn't... I can't even say it was stressful. It was just like... It's just a very odd experience. It was like watching somebody else do it, while also like having to like obviously really not fuck it up and really concentrate.
Because you're also sort of on camera a bit, aren't you? They sort of
on camera, in-ear producer, like. But they were brilliant with me though, like because I did have a lot of imposter syndrome and I turned up and they were brilliant with me. The people behind the scenes, like
they looked after you.
They like the in-ear producer, I don't even know what that's called, which goes to show what a fucker I am. She came up to me day one and she was like, "You're going to smash it and I've got you," And I was like, "Oh, thank you," And the boss, the CEO guy came up to me and he was like, "You are going to kill this. We're all fully behind you." And that, means a lot, that stuff.
Yeah.
So I was a bit like, okay, they're all into this, which is good. Because there was definitely a bit of like, "Hey everyone,
hi,
I'm the random English guy that's going to be doing the commentary," So yeah, I might go and try and do that. But yeah.
So given like dry slope to being at the natural selection, sort of give me a standout moment of snowboarding where you've just thought, fucking hell, this is it. Not a monetary thing like the Revelstoke thing, but just like where you realise like I am where I'm supposed to be, or
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's just the days, isn't it? It's just the days that you remember, the memorable days. I remember that day we had. I remember I did a fun trip to like the Three Valley. I mean, it sounds so workaday this, but like just pre-COVID with Chris and Ben Mundy and Drew and a close friend of ours, Ollie Arnold. Got good snow, like got 3 days, just really good powder. It wasn't dangerous. It was, I knew the resort really well. I knew where I was going. I was just a joy, like amazing trip to Japan the other year. Yeah, I just remember those experiences really, like, and I had an amazing day in Iran, like, years ago, where we had a great day up the hill. It was a proper mountain. It was, we were really surprised. We got there and it was like, fuck me, this resort is good, And we met all these locals because, like, that country is, I mean, I don't know what it's like now because this is nearly 20 years ago, but back then it was like, it's first world, got loads of oil money. So it's like as wealthy as the UK.
Right.
Like, obviously, that's
not the impression.
It's not the impression that you get at all.
No.
I remember like Hamish had a dodgy knee and Hamish McKnight, and the guide was like, what's wrong with your knee? And he's like, oh, I need an ACL scan. And the guy was like, why don't you just get it done? He's like, can't afford it. And like back home, they'll be like, year waiting list. And he's like, I could probably get you one for like £100 if you want. Like, like it's like it's pretty standard around here.
No way.
So that, a lot of those experiences anyway. So we get to this resort and we basically met a load of snowboarders. This is the point of why I bring this up. Like, and they had kit. They're all in New Burton stuff,
right.
and and we walked into this cafe because we drove into this resort. And we just went to get a coffee in this cafe, and there's all these snowboarders in there, and they were like, "Who the fuck are you lot?" And we were like, "Oh, we're English and Scottish," and they were just like, minds blown, And we're incredibly welcoming, and they were like, "Right, you can ride with us tomorrow." So they showed us around. To be honest, they couldn't really ride,
Amazing.
but like, they took us up this ridge, and there was this like just open valley, like we were like, "Can we go down there?" And they were like, "Yeah, go for it." So it would be like, that Valley of the Kings in Les Arcs.
In Les Arcs, yeah.
It's like that.
Absolutely.
Fucking
hell.
Like, and there's no one there, and it was untracked, and no one had ever really ridden it. So it was like, we were like, fuck me. And then we got down to the road, and we had to hitch a lift, and we got a lift from this guy who's like in the Iranian Air Force, like, who drove us back to our hotel, went and did another run, hiked the ridge again, rode back down. I actually went down before everyone. Got down to the room, turned the TV on. The Manchester Derby was playing on the Iranian TV, and I was like, "Wow, this is the best day ever!" Like, United won, so it was. Stuff like that. Obviously, so lucky to be able to do things like that. Those are things that I remember, and those are things that I kind of want to do more of. You said, "What?" I'm 50 in 2.5 years, so I'm going to try and do a really big trip in 2 years, January 26.
Yeah.
And just try and have an open invite. Might go to Japan and just be like, anyone want to come?
Sign me up.
Yeah, I reckon could get a good group.
I reckon you'll get a good crew.
Yeah, and that could be really fun.
Was it your 40th or was it your wedding anniversary when shitloads of people turned up in Croydon?
Yeah,
that was amazing.
Yeah. So kind of something like that.
You've got the social glue.
Yeah, well, I think me and Drew, our birthdays are a week apart. We're the same age. So we always celebrate our big milestone birthday. So we're talking about that for 50. We're like, yeah, we should do proper. I talked to Stenty about going to Georgia on one of his trips, but he can only do 12. And I think we'd definitely get more than 12. So I'm kind of now thinking Japan. Although we could just fucking take over Moran's gaff.
Just go anywhere.
Might be cheaper.
Get a good crew. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? If you get a good crew together, really.
Yeah, maybe I'll speak to Chris. Maybe just say, look, you can probably get a few people in there, can't you, these days? Yeah. So, yeah, more of that, I think.
All right, great. And then just to finish on, when you look over, this isn't too much of a reflective thing, but what does snowboarding mean to you still? Like, when you think about it, what has it done for you?
Well, it's definitely given me the life that I've got, and it's definitely given me kind of just gave me the confidence to try and live life on my own terms, really. Yeah. And that's a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a big thing. So I think that is, and, obviously the people that I've talked about have been a huge part of that. And then, I really want to stress that, like the mentors, the friends that have shown me the way are so important, for me as a person. So they had a lot to do with that. But really all the experiences, have just given me the kind of confidence to think, I can kind of do this the way I want to do it, really, And it hasn't always worked. And there's been loads of shitty times, especially through work, things, ups and downs and all that. But I've always kind of just felt like I had a bit of a intuitive understanding of where I wanted to get to, even if I didn't quite understand, what it meant at the time. So I think it's given me that, really, Okay,
and if I said the last thing was the final thing, but this is the final thing. Given your skill at pitching, what would you say to someone who maybe hasn't been snowboarding for a while or is thinking about getting into it? What would you say to them to kind of motivate them?
Yeah, that's quite a hard one, isn't it?
Or why should someone go snowboarding?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it is a very joyous activity, isn't it? Like when you know, that moment when, what I'm really looking forward to is getting off the lift for the first time. Because like I said, I've not been actually for a couple of years now. I feel like quite a fraud about that. Like, to be honest, you know, given everything I've just spoken, I spoke to my wife about this the other day. I was like, I really need to go snowboarding. I know that sounds like fucking really stupid, but like, I'm starting to feel a bit fraudulent. Like, you know, the fact that I'm not, like, I need to go riding. And the thing that I'm really looking forward to is, you know, when you haven't been for a bit and you get off the lift and you kind of start getting used to your board and you jump up and down on your board a little bit and then you do those first, you know, turns on the piece, whatever. It's always a bit like, it's just, that's always nice, isn't it? You're always a bit like, fuck yeah, this is fucking rad. Like, so that's what I'm looking forward to. And I think so I'd say like chase a bit of that, really, you know, because it doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't matter like where you're coming out from, that initial feeling of what it means to turn a snowboard, to ride a snowboard is a universal thing, and it's very joyous and addictive, isn't it? And that's I quite miss that. So I'm gonna get on the phone and start doing some blagging, I think. Yeah.
So there you are, Matt Barr. What a pleasure to have him on the other side of the microphone with me asking the questions for once. I've been an avid listener to the Looking Sideways podcast since it started. He really has spoken to everyone that you could hope to speak to, some with some success. I was a bit disappointed by the Terrier episode. I think he would probably agree that maybe he didn't get the best out of him, or actually Terrier's not actually that interesting as a person, or can't convey it when he chats. But he's also, some of the ones that I've really enjoyed were the David Benedict episode. I think I've got a slight man crush on David Benedict. Who else? Who's the guy that used to ride for Barefoot? Oh, I can't remember that guy. But anyway, he's a scriptwriter in LA now, and I found that story interesting. He spoke to Greg Stump, who made the Blizzard of Ours and License to Thrill, like some old ski movies. And after hearing that story, I actually messaged Greg Stump because those movies certainly influenced me, and actually Mia Brooks's dad, Nige, which we get into on their podcast episode, which is coming shortly. So yeah, if you haven't, and I can't believe that you won't have, if you haven't checked out Matt's Looking Sideways podcast, then I really do recommend it. He is really kind of on top of his game and chatting to some of the most interesting people involved in snowboarding and just in the sort of outdoors world. So yeah, check that out. There'll be links in the show notes, but I'm sure you must listen to that already. If you listen to this, you've got to be listening to that. So yeah, what else is going on? A few shout outs. Ben Weezer, Ian Cocking, Mark Chester, Kate Cheney, who used to be called Kate Bastow, who worked for me at the Chalet in France. We used to do, before anybody else, I think, we used to do Zoom evenings where we'd sit on, I think it was Skype at the time, and we would talk about how the Chalet's going and drink some red wine together virtually. That was how we did our staff meetings. Kate Bastow, all now known as Kate Cheney, sending much love to you. Ben Hoskins and Ian Bridges. There's a few names in there that you might recognise from copies of Snowboard UK and Whitelines. And it's good to see the community coming together and getting in touch with me, which you can do by giving me a shout on Instagram, on the DMs. Thank you, Snowboarding Podcast. Or you can hit us up at thankyouSnowboarding@gmail.com. Either way, I'm happy to chat. And also, I have been posting into the UK Snowboard History group stuff from the Instagram every day, and obviously details of the episodes as they come. I think it's Russ Shea who runs that. Russ, I hope you don't mind me kind of hijacking, and certainly I think some other people have taken the cue to kind of find stuff and post it up. So there's actually quite a plethora of funny memories and stuff going up there most days. It is fun looking back. We're not entirely looking backwards at this in this podcast, although it is fun to go and hear some of the early stories we are looking forward to. And we've got, and on that, we've got Nige and Vicky, who are Mia's mum and dad, on the show soon. We're just trying to actually catch up with Mia and see how things are going since winning X Games. That is going to be coming in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. What else? The music at the start that Matt chose is by Graham Nash. The track is called Better Days, and it's DCP's section into a movie called Into the Mind, which I think is a bit of a multidiscipline movie. It's not just snowboarding, but they've certainly... I hadn't seen it before, and they've done a really good job. DCP is obviously an avid surfer as well and a great snowboarder, and it kind of manages to cross the feeling of both of those things into kind of the way it's been shot, and it's really quite cool. So that is a movie worth checking out. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, but it's on the top of our Shredflix playlist on the YouTube channel, which is also Thank You Snowboarding. I think that's about it for this time. If you want to get in touch with us, please do. Everything will be in the show notes, all the ways to get hold of us and the Instagram and whatnot. Still got to send love out to the Snowboard Asylum. They just quietly go about their business of looking after British snowboarders, making sure they get the right advice for the right kit. If you're new to the sport and listening to this, then getting the right kit is so critically important. If you buy something that's not going to suit you, you're going to have a shit time when you go away. Or, if you head to the dry slope or whatever, having the right kit, boots that fit, boots that feel good, outerwear that works in the conditions that you want to use it for. All this stuff's really, really important and will keep you snowboarding and mean that you enjoy your snowboarding. And obviously that's being lost with small independent shops closing down, as we were speaking with Oggy in last week's episode. All that anecdotal knowledge and stuff is kind of being lost, but it's not being lost at the Snowboard Asylum. They employ snowboarders. It's snowboarders running the show for other snowboarders. That is what we are all about. So if you need kit, go and see them. They support us. You can support them. And I'll keep firing these episodes out of you. It's just a whole glorious merry-go-round of snowboarding fun. I don't know where I'm going anymore. So that's about it for this time. Please do get in touch with your tales of snowboarding or any anecdotes or any just what snowboarding means to you. It's really important that I hear from you, not just the people that we have on the podcast. They're not the only people that are part of UK snowboard culture. Everyone, if you're riding dry slope, if you're doing a season, however you're finding snowboarding, you are also part of the UK culture. And it's what will keep it alive into the future. So if you do want to share anything with us, then all the links are in the show notes. We'd love to have you involved. All right, I think I'm out of here for now. This has been a long one. We're an hour and a half in. I'll leave you, and we will see you again this time next week. As for now, thank you, snowboarding. Peace.